If American taxpayers decline to pay the bills for ensuring the long-term health of Iraq, America would leave behind mountains of rubble and mobs of angry people. War on Iraq, American Academy of Arts and Sciences.
Welcome back to Inside Iraq. We are looking at the profit and loss sheet of the American enterprise in Iraq with Ashraf al-Bayoumi, George Joffe, and Patrick Clausen. Patrick, the American plan for the invasion of Iraq went awry. What we have seen since 2003, massive upheavals, and the Pandora's box has opened. We've seen sectarian. Surely that is a negative mark in that profit and loss sheet.
Well, I would agree with the United Nations Security Council about this matter. The United Nations Security Council at the end of the war ordered and mandated the occupation of Iraq led by the United States, and the Security Council has repeatedly extended the U.S. role in Iraq. So the international legal position is very clear. The United States has the mandate from the United Nations for its presence in Iraq.
But it does not have a mandate for upheaval and killing, and over 1 million people killed, and more than 4 million people are refugees.
Sir, what the Security Council said was that how we got to this situation is not something that we like. It is a situation that we don't like to see happening, but now that we are in this situation, we need to do something to try to fix it. And that is why the Security Council has extended repeatedly the American mandate. To quote the Saudi foreign minister, he said, "We don't like how you came into Iraq uninvited. Please do not leave Iraq uninvited." And that is why the United States has been staying in Iraq at the invitation of the Iraqi government and at the order of the Security Council.
Let me run that by Ashraf Bayoumi and George Joffe simultaneously. Ashraf Bayoumi, the culprit is the UN.
Frankly, the analogies they are strikingly false, but it is consistent with what Mr. Clausen is coming from. He is quoting the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia. There are lies. And why doesn't he quote the Pope, the former Pope, who said that this is a criminal war, illegal war, and immoral war? And then before that, he was speaking about democracy as if the United States is truly interested in democracy. They removed the government, which was democratically elected, like Mossadegh, like Allende. They are against Hamas, which is democratically elected. And the list of dictatorship that the United States administrations have supported in South Africa, in Spain, in Portugal, in even South Korea, in all over the world, in Panama, in Noriega.
I don't have time for all that list, Ashraf Bayoumi. Let me get a response from George Joffe.
It is a big lie. It is a big lie.
I heard you loud and clear.
To assume that the United States is interested in democracy in the world.
George Joffe, the culprit is the United Nations, according to Patrick Clausen. You have invited us. You told us to change us from an occupier to a mandated presence.
Well, I don't think Patrick Clausen suggested the United Nations had invited the United States to intervene. What he said was the United Nations reluctantly approved of the invasion after it had taken place. That may well be true, but it seems to me to be quite irrelevant. The United States is still in Iraq because it's now engaged in a major insurgency, and it can't actually get out. If it were to leave suddenly, then it might leave behind it a much worse chaos. And indeed, the Bush administration has not been prepared to contemplate that, partly because of its own sense of amour propre. It doesn't want to be seen to have created a catastrophic mistake inside the Middle East. And now, of course, it can argue that it's trained up an Iraqi army to replace it. And that army will indeed carry through the mission assigned to it so that eventually democracy will arrive. But that's a flawed argument too. 70% of the officer corps of the new Iraqi army are the old Iraqi army. And it seems to me what's much more likely is that eventually they will introduce the kind of military dictatorship as that was removed. In other words, the United States will have participated in an interesting circular process whereby it restores virtually what it removed.
Patrick Clausen, I noticed when I brought up the upheavals and the sectarian Pandora's box, you diverted the answer towards the United Nations. Let me take you back to the same question. Go ahead.
Well, because the two speakers said that international legality was a central question. Yet when international law is against them, suddenly the question changes. And so what we find is that decisions by the United Nations Security Council are appealed to by the two other speakers when they go in their favor. But when they go against them, who cares about international law? Well, I would agree that the question of what's actually happening on the ground is very important. And there has been considerable improvement over the last year. After several years of a very difficult time, things are slowly improving in Iraq on the ground. And those who claim that the situation in Iraq is desperate and horrible are frankly a year behind the times.
Go ahead, George.
Things are getting better and better.
The real way in which the surge was able to achieve its objectives was to create yet a new militia. And the militia it created was the Awakening Movement, which had been, some months before, opposed to the American presence, but for its own reasons decided to join in, but which will fall out of that relationship if indeed it receives no ultimate benefits, particularly integration into the new Iraqi army. So the question of success is really very contingent, and I don't think it's a matter to suggest that those that still decry the American actions are somehow a year behind the times. And it's also not the case that either I or Ashraf suggested that we appealed only to international law when it suited our purposes. What we actually did was to point out the war itself was not approved. And you in fact, in your comments, confirmed that.
Ashraf Bayoumi, in your last comment, you listed a whole list of countries that they were at the receiving end of the U.S.
No.
Just before you comment,
to make two short comments.
Before you do that,
two short comments. First of all, Mr. Clausen is forgetting, if he really believes in democracy, that the majority of the American people want out of Iraq, are against the war in Iraq, and because of the economic suffering, because of the material suffering, because of the human suffering. The other thing, before leaving that show, we have to really emphasize one thing, that the issue of Iraq and the attack on Iraq and its occupation has little to do with Iraq itself. It has to do with preventing the rising power, mainly Russia and China, and the fact that global capitalism is in crisis. But unfortunately, the time is not available to explain that. If people believe in democracy, look at how democracy in the United States has been compromised by the Bush administration, by Gonzales, by Cheney. People who really truly believe in democracy, first of all, they protect their own people.
I am coming towards the very end of the show, Ashraf Bayoumi. Let me just ask Patrick Clausen about the global rise of anti-Americanism and the big loss of U.S. credibility, not only in the region but worldwide. Do you share that assessment, or do you think that is a measure of hyperbole?
Oh, no, that's quite accurate. At the end of the Cold War, the almost universal impression around the world was that the United States had become too arrogant, and that it's not surprising that the United States became the object of criticism. That's what usually happens when there's only one superpower. Everyone turns on it. So this is what was widely expected, and it's what's happening.
My last comment and my last questions is to George Joffe. George, summarize it for us. Is this a major fiasco, or this is a work in progress?
I'm afraid to say I think it is indeed a major fiasco, and that it will take the United States many years to overcome the consequences of what it has done, not just in Iraq, but in the wider Middle East. And that was not part of the intention, nor simply a consequence of the unpopularity of the sole superpower. Indeed, American unpopularity grew dramatically, not just in the Middle East, but elsewhere too, after the invasion of Iraq. Have we forgotten that in 2001, even the French could say we are all Americans now? Now, nobody would say that. And I think that's a true measure of the depth of the failure that the United States has created in Iraq and in the Middle East.
Final comment, Patrick Clausen. 5 years from now, if we are doing Inside Iraq, will we be talking about the profit loss sheet in the red or in the black? Will we see a major improvement, or is it going to be a slippery slope all the way down?
A very considerable improvement. Iraq is climbing out of the deep hole that Saddam dug for it, and I suspect will be quite a better country over the coming years.
Patrick Clausen from Washington Institute for Near East Policy, George Joffe from the Cambridge University, and Ashraf al-Bayoumi, a political activist from Cairo. Gentlemen, thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq. To access the show and to send us your comments, please go to aljazeera.net/English. That's all the time we have for this week. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.